Hello again. To continue on the topic of the Algerian War and the French government and the French army, the next thing that we're going to be talking about, which is really one of the most important aspects, one of the more important that really dragged much of the war, was the guerrilla fighting of the war. So the legionnaires, which were the soldiers of the French Foreign Legion, the elite formation of the French army, conducted assassination and retaliation attacks against the FLN supporters. This, of course, angered the FLN leadership. Guerrilla warfare is always a rough and hard type of thing, which leads into this large circle of fighting. As with this war, that is exactly what happened during 1955. FLN attacks would provoke retaliatory attacks by the French army, who would in turn use vicious attack methods against the civilian supporters of the FLN to discourage their support and to gain information about their activities. The FLN would often put hard pressure in the Algerian civilians and terrorize the Pied Noir. Now, unfortunately, much of the guerrilla warfare was launched on non-combatants, so, most of this was just on the harmless civilians. And this was prominently seen in August of 1955, when a unit of FLN guerrillas descended on the city of Philippeville. By the time the guerrillas left, 123 civilians, Pied Noir, and Muslims had died. Every time the guerrillas would strike the French would strike back even harder. The French retaliation hit about 1,200 that were killed from inside estimates, but about 12,000 were killed by a cord of outside estimates. This is just one of many examples that we like to call collective responsibility, which is the practice of holding all members of a population responsible for the actions of its few members. Now, this ideology held true for both sides of the war as a way to discourage support for the enemy, because if, harmless people were getting killed because of their actions, it was sort of a way to discourage them from any further fighting and supporting, the opposite side of where they were. And the real terrible thing about guerrilla warfare was that it was launched, mostly against harmless civilians that really bore the brunt of the fighting. Guerrilla warfare was particularly brutal on the Algerian side during 1956 and 1957. They would launch a guerrilla attack against those that would be affiliated with the French authorities. This resulted in acts of sadistic torture and the most brutal violence against everyone, including women and children. Kidnapping was commonplace, as were the ritual murder and mutilation of civilians. So guerrilla warfare was used on both sides of the war, the French and the Algerians, and it was really rough and really drove a lot of the fighting in the war and was waged mostly against civilians, which was one of the harder things to deal with, because they were losing so many people that weren't even fighting on the front lines. So guerrilla warfare, when taking into account of the Algerian war, is one of the bigger things to think about. And we'll get more into other details of the war later on.